Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
In this analysis episode, I'm going to discuss why I think LPWA is an existential threat to mobile in the IoT industry, with the first battle royale being between cellular and LPWA at Mobile World Congress 2016.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is for business leaders and managers employing the Internet of Things for their business or the business of their customers. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair, and I interview the industry's leading authorities to find out how they use IoT to improve business and create value. If you like this show, subscribe to it on iTunes and go to iotinc.com to check out my complimentary articles, videos, meetups, and webinars.
Hi, this is Bruce Sinclair, and this is going to be a slightly different type of podcast today. Up to this point, for followers of this show, you know that I've been pretty exclusively doing interviews. And the interviews have followed a very specific editorial calendar, and that is following the packets from sensor all the way to analytics and applications, with a number of interviews that have been thrown in there with practitioners that are actually helping companies, either system integrators or product design firms that are helping companies launch their IoT products, or I should say go from concept to minimal viable product and then to final launch. However, I think what's missing in those type of interviews is a little bit of perspective and a little bit of analysis. Guests are obviously experts in their particular area, but sometimes I think there's value in looking at maybe what they spoke about in their podcast, but in a larger context. So what I like to do is, starting with this podcast, and well, hopefully it's not going to be a disaster, but starting with this podcast, I like to reflect back on the previous week. Now, whether that'll be to talk about the previous week's podcast, or potentially the video interview that I've done, or what's hot in the news. And this time, what I'd like to do is go on the news route, and that is to talk about Mobile World Congress 2016. Now, it's been a long time since I've been to Mobile World Congress. In fact, I've only been one time, and it was around 10 years ago. I think it was in 2007. At the time, I was CEO of a company called Hexago. We were an IPv6 company, and we were looking for a way into the market. The fixed operators were taking their sweet time in buying our equipment. There were no rush to invest in infrastructure without a return on investment. So we thought potentially with the advent of the smartphone that there would be more interest from mobile operators to use IPv6 to be able to access and use it in their data services. And there were a number of technical reasons that I'm not going to go into right now that kind of made sense. One of the biggest one was to do with the battery energy management. Well, the long story short is my first visit to Mobile World Congress was my last visit, and that was because we went there to talk about IPv6, but in reality, people didn't even know what IP was. At that time, it really was a conference that was focused on voice, and smartphones were coming out, and data was there, but there wasn't really that much awareness, and so generally, we'd be getting blank stares from people. Now, we were exhibiting in the Canadian Pavilion, so we didn't have our own booth, but we did see a lot of traffic. But when we were able to start up some conversations, there really wasn't much to talk about because that just wasn't where the thought process was, at that time. Now, obviously, fast forward 10 years later, data is is very big, and obviously all the services, all the apps, much bigger than the voice component. And so I know it's a whole different world. Now, but I still didn't consider Mobile World Congress as being a place to go until a lot of people started asking me just in the last couple of weeks, are you going to be going to the show? They were going to the show, and they thought, they were saying that it seems like there's a lot more momentum for IoT at MWC. Now, I think that's true, but as the name implies, it really is focused on the mobile component of that. And in particular, what we're talking about here is the backhaul connectivity using cellular networks. Now, this year, one of the biggest themes, at least in my view, is going to be the battle royale between cellular technology and LPWA technology. Now, for people that didn't listen to a previous episode, I had an episode with, it was a kind of a combo episode with both Laura and with Sigfox. They take two different perspectives, or two different business models for how they're approaching LPWA. And LPWA stands for Low Power Wide Area Network. Sometimes it's called LPWAN. But in any case, it is a technology that allows you to transmit small amounts of data for over very long distances with very little battery power. And what's interesting is the long distance part, because up until this point, that really was the purview of a cellular connection. Of course, there could be a satellite. You could use satellite as your backhaul as well. But generally, it's been the cellular connection for applications where you don't have a fiber uplink, where you're kind of in the middle of nowhere and you require connectivity, or whether it's mobile, like a telematics type of application where you need connectivity, a backhaul connectivity, and there isn't a Wi-Fi or some other land or wired connection. So LPWA is an existential threat to the cellular technology, and specifically to the mobile operators. Because what you have right now is you have a new generation of companies like the two that I mentioned, although Laura is an association made up of a number of companies. But companies like Sigfox and the members of LoRa are providing a technology that has some definitive advantages over cellular technology. And I guess I probably stated that incorrectly. From a technology point of view, cellular is better pretty much on any way that you measure it. It has more bandwidth. Well, maybe that's the only way to measure it. Maybe I take that back. But in any case, it has been the de facto standard for a big part of their business. For example, Verizon's what they call now their IoT telematics business, it represents $690 million a year. So $500 million in revenue. And in fact, it even grew at 18% last year. So there is a big stake there. And as I was saying, with the players from LPWA, there's an existential threat because of not their technology, but to correct myself, because of their business model. The costs associated with doing LPWA, while the bandwidth is a lot lower, and there's other advantages. The battery life is a lot higher. It's somewhat related to the bandwidth, but their distance can go further than between cell towers. So you need fewer towers. But the biggest advantage, and the reason it's such a big threat to cellular technology, and specifically to the mobile operators that use cellular technology, is because of the cost basis. Cellular technology has the distinct disadvantage of some costs that are not burdening the LPWA folks. And in particular, there's two costs. The first one is amortized over a lot of users, and so perhaps, I don't know what the numbers are, but perhaps it doesn't amount to that much. But that is, they use a licensed band. There are advantages of using a licensed spectrum band because no one else is in there. So the signal is going to be clearer. However, there's a cost, and this is generally a cost where you're doing bidding on a country-by-country basis, and they can range up into billions of dollars of cost. Now, again, amortizing that over many users, I'm not sure how significant it is. But what is a significant cost is licensing I'm not sure what the terminology is, an LPWA is the modem, but it's the connectivity, it's the SIM, it's what reads the SIM or uses the SIM as part of the technology that is between the SIM and the radio. And again, I'm certainly not an expert in this area, but what I do know is that there's a licensing fee, and I believe it's all going to Qualcomm, but there's a licensing fee because of patents that have been filed that if you want to use cellular technology, you're going to have to pay somewhere, again, I'm going to get them, I won't be off by magnitudes, but I may be off by a multiple, but it's going to be something along the lines of $10 to $20 per device. Now, if you think about that, it makes a lot of sense if you're outfitting a $250,000 truck with a $20 connection. But there are many different type applications, even within telematics, where that extra $20 per unit is prohibitive. And so this is the biggest advantage that LPWA has over the cellular technology is going to be in these licensing fees. Now, there's disadvantages too, right? Because you're in an unlicensed spectrum, then there will be some, let's say, potentially some conflict between different waves. Now, of course, there's technology that tries to overcome that. But again, I think the business advantages are going to be significant enough that what you're seeing at Mobile World Congress is this battle royale of the wireless carriers trying to be relevant in this new space. Now, how are they going to do this? Well, one is they could change their business model, but I'm not sure how that's going to happen. Right now, it's more on a subscriber basis, and even if you were to meter it based on, let's say, bandwidth or number of packets or some other metric, it's still going to be difficult to get around that licensing cost. So one area that's being announced, and it's been talked about for a little bit of time now, has been LTE-M, or sometimes they call it Cat-M. Now, this is, again, I don't know the exact differences between it, but it is using unlicensed spectrum, and I'm assuming because of that, the technology is different. I think it's more like LPWA, if not very similar or identical to LPWA. They get around the licensing. Problems. Now, one of the other disadvantages that you have when trying to standardize cellular technology is it just takes a long time. The standardization bodies, to get them to agree, if anyone's been to these meetings, it is a bit of a show in itself, but it just takes a long time. There's careers that are spent just doing that. So there are standards, and then there are de facto standards. And I think, this is one of the biggest worries of the mobile industry is two parts. Is that they will not be able to move quick enough to be able to offer a solution at a low enough price to take advantage of the growth in IoT, but also to not lose some of the significant revenue that they're already making, what they used to classify as telematics revenue. And again, consider Verizon's, it's like, almost $700 million in revenue. So I guess the takeaways, from this discussion are twofold. The first one is, if you are using cellular technology today, then at some point your license is going to come up. And before that point, I recommend that you do look at the alternatives, and the alternatives being if it fits in your use case. Now, if you need to send large volumes of data, it's not going to fit. But if it does fit within your use case, I would definitely consider looking at the various different forms of LPWA. It could be something like a Sigfox, which is a very similar model to an AT&T, where you become a subscriber to their network. Or it could be with one of the members of the LoRa Alliance or the similar other types of alliances. I haven't had them on the show yet, where you're where you're either building your own network, which is possible, or you're licensing similar. Again, you're becoming a subscriber on someone else's license, someone else's network that has built their own network out based on in this case, the LoRa technology. So the first thing is, if you're on cellular today, take a look at it. Take a look at the alternatives. The second thing is that if you're new and you're an entrepreneur, or you're even within an existing enterprise and you're looking at a new IoT product, again, if you need to span long distances, now this could be an infrastructure type play, smart cities kind of play. This can be an industrial internet play, where maybe on a pipeline or oil production or agriculture, precision ag. There's a lot of use cases where you need to send data over long distances, where before the only alternative was cellular. So the second takeaway is to make sure that you investigate LPWA further. On my site and this podcast, as I've mentioned, I think at least once now, that I did do an interview with both LoRa and Sigfox. I tried getting a couple others on the interview, but they didn't move quick enough. And then secondly, I do also have a video, and this is another 1 year older, with Luke Darcy. He's the managing director of the US for Sigfox, and it's actually quite a popular video, so you might want to take a look at that. But competition is good, and I just want to make sure everyone is aware of LPWA, and in particular, that's my takeaway from Mobile World Congress this year. And there's going to be plenty of other announcements, but I think, specifically around a backhaul that is in the use case where fiber connection or wired connection is far and few between, and where maybe satellite is another story, because generally it's cost prohibitive, although I'm sure there are efforts to bring that down. But just take a look at LPWA, and I think it's just being exemplified by Mobile World Congress and what's going on there. And this is really, I think, just a foreshadowing of the next couple of years when these networks go live, because they are going live now. They're going live in cities like San Francisco. They're going live in countries like France. So this push to get to a de facto standard may indeed happen quicker than going to some other standard that may be on the mobile side of things. Well, that's all I pretty much have for this podcast. Again, these are intended. Maybe I'll ramble on. It seems like I have no problem in rambling on for a long time on different topics, but maybe I'll ramble on longer in other episodes. But this one's around a quarter of the length of the interview-based episodes. And, well, let me know what you think. This is just the first one. It's probably going to take me a little bit of time to catch my stride on this and to kind of get into a rhythm where it makes sense. But what I'm going to try to do, again, just to repeat myself, is just provide a different vantage point, more of an analytical vantage point of what's going on in context of IoT, looking at specific topics. Some of them, again, will be based on reviewing interviews that I've done, whether they're on the podcast or whether they're on the videos, or just news that's out there that I think is of interest and that I can hopefully provide some value to everyone listening. So again, love to hear your feedback, good or bad, improvements, how to improve this. And I'm sure it's going to get better. Just like my first interview podcast, I'm sure was a disaster, and it just takes practice. But I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this for a little while longer for a couple reasons. It's just, again, I think a different perspective is useful. And sometimes it's difficult to get great guests and to keep that cadence up of weekly, which I did at the very beginning, to get good guests that are on my calendar. Because again, I'm not just randomly choosing topics, at least not yet. Has been challenging, and I want to make sure that I put out a good product. So look out for another interview next week. It's going to be our second interview on legal issues. I did the interview this morning, so it'll be a great podcast that'll come out next week. And again, love to hear your thoughts on this one, this type of one, and how it can be improved. So until then, we'll talk to you soon. Okay, well, that was the first analysis episode 44. I hope it wasn't too rambling and provided some sort of value.
Well, now I could use your help. We're trying to get this show off the ground, and the best way to get discovered is with iTunes. So if you've enjoyed the episode or found it informative, I'd really appreciate a review. All you have to do is go to iot-inc.com/iTunes, and that'll redirect you to our iTunes page where you can let people know what you think by simply giving this show a star review or leaving a comment. I'd really appreciate that. If you'd like to learn more about the business of the Internet of Things, visit my media site. It can be found at iot-inc.com. There you'll find other podcasts as well as articles, videos, and information about upcoming live events like my stream meetups and webinars.
If you have any ideas or suggestions about this new episode format, I'd love to hear from you. Just send me an email at bruce@iot-inc.com. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening to my first analysis episode. Until next time, may your path to IoT business be a long-range one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.